This conference will now be recorded.
There we go. Okay, so NACD passed a diversity statement last year, and they also formed a task force that put together a list of recommendations. And so I just wanted to go through those really quickly, and then provide an opportunity to talk about what we'd like to do with DACD moving forward with that. Okay, here's work. So the statement is on their website. I think I shared it at a few different board meetings, and I just wanted to call out this one section of it. We call on conservation districts to actively engage all members of their local communities to understand conservation issues important to diverse populations, to encourage greater diversity in local elections, and to encourage even greater transparency and open dialogue in conservation district programs. And so one of the things that I liked about the recommendations that they put together in their statement was it was really just a reminder that the districts are intended to serve all of the constituents in your local communities. And so I think in general, we do a really good job with that. We're just also maybe looking at if there are additional opportunities to make sure that we're not missing anybody and that everybody's represented at the table in order to make sure that we're getting to all of the communities and all the corners of conservation, if you will. So they included a few definitions. Diversity is who we are. Broad concept that encompasses all the differences among individuals and is all inclusive. Equity is how we do it, and inclusion is what we do. So bringing individuals and groups into processes, activities, and decision making and policy making in a way that empowers and values them. So I liked that statement that they have right at the front there, of course, report. So they talked about different actions. This was for NACD specifically, but I think it kind of made for a nice roadmap for the state associations and individual districts as well. So they reviewed their internal governance. They looked at their board of supervisor job descriptions, their bylaws, and their strategic plan. In their case, they didn't end up making any changes to those, but the review process was important. They looked at programs, policies, and procedures, specifically with regards to open meeting laws. They looked at the significance of the local work groups and local conservation district elections. And I think I get into this in the next slide too, but they were really looking at where are the opportunities to make sure that you provide ways that different people can connect. You know, you're overcoming any barriers to participation with remote meetings. You're looking at the possibility of offering translated materials and meeting announcements, and maybe putting those announcements up in places that you haven't traditionally to try and capture a different audience. And they also looked at the importance of an awareness of generational communication. So older board supervisors or older members of the community might have different preferences in communication when compared to younger members of the community. And being aware of what those look like is also important in order to make sure that you're reaching everybody effectively. So I think this was what I outlined a little bit before, engaging all members of the local communities. And so they had a statement in there that I liked when trying to reach all members of the community to meet them where they are. And, you know, I think it's just kind of worth a pause. Everybody's busy with the work that they do in each district, but just to kind of sit and think if there are additional ways, if there are additional members of the community that are being reached in the current channels, and how would we go about meeting them where they are. And then, so I already mentioned placing announcements in different places, specifically in underrepresented or underserved communities. Developing materials in other languages, potentially, if that's the communities that we're missing. And looking for ways to remove barriers to participation. So remote meetings, potentially, different outreach methods, and new locations announcements. And then seeking out new partnerships. If there are additional groups that we're not working with yet, that we could be, that would help expand our reach. And with that, I'm going to stop and kind of tell a story, I guess. I think you just asked me where my husband works, him. And so he works with the Department of Labor. And so it's kind of a case study in something that has been going on in his world here recently. The Department of Labor is working on enforcing a new law. So it doesn't matter what the law is, that's not really part of the story. But my husband, as part of kind of working on heading up the new law and communicating that it's a new requirement and things like that, he was trying to figure out how he could go through and make sure that all members of the community were engaged and aware of this new requirement. And so it was almost by accident, but he ended up teaming up with the Delaware Hispanic Coalition. And so the Hispanic community in Delaware is really important for the success of the new law. And so he's been working with them, he's been having meetings with them, he's been going on radio stations with translators to talk about the importance of the new law. And I think it was something that he just sort of tapped into and has found a lot of success with it. And so I don't know if there's an equivalent to the Delaware Hispanic Coalition that we can join forces with or something like that. But I'm trying to figure out quite how to say this. He's a rather skeptical person sometimes when it comes to some of these issues. And so he's been really enthusiastic about the success of this partnership. So I wanted to open it up here to take a look at how DACD might move forward in looking at these questions. So a couple of options that I thought of, is definitely the only ones. The DACD could look at adopting a policy similar to NACD, and we can include that in our supervisor's handbook. We don't really have a policy book per se, but we could post it on our website. We might include it in our bylaws if we want to pass that at a future meeting. I think the other option that we could look at is forming a small committee to identify opportunities. I don't know offhand what it looks like right now, but we could put a few people together to see if there are additional partners that we could work with and opportunities to engage stakeholders beyond what we do today. So I wanted to throw a couple of those out, and then also to see if anybody else had a preference or additional ideas to put on there.
Well, I'll share. I sit on the board of the Delaware Major Society, and I sit on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And initially, without casting guilt or anything else, I mean, DNS's composition as a board, and we have a 22-person board, it's roughly equivalent to, from a diversity standpoint, to this board. Okay, it's 95% Caucasian. And so when the board first considered putting together a committee to look at these opportunities for increasing participation, both at the board level, at the staff level, and at the membership. Now, it was pretty obvious that any committee made up of solely board members was in and of itself going to be unrepresentative of the community you're trying to engage with. So I think it's a good idea, one, to have a policy. The policy needs to be well thought out to be, I think, meaningful. But two, I think there are opportunities to increase stakeholders of that state. I think we need to reach out to others who are not in this room, who are not members of our board, in order to get meaningful input about how, to reach out with Hispanic group. I know I have a good connection to that community. Matthew Walters, our urban conservation coordinator, she's made inroads in Newcastle County, touching, underrepresented communities, especially in the city of Wilmington. But there are areas in Newcastle County that we may not have those connections. And again, it's a challenge to reach out and connect with folks who are not used to working with. I think it's something that we should do because it would help not only them, but it will help us, attract more interest and resources for what we do and help us help more people. So, something I would support and be willing to participate in to the extent, I could. I should.
Jason, do you have something?
I do. I'm like, okay, I want to talk a bit, but well, first and foremost, I really want to say thank you. Your comments are very fascinating. And if anything, Jim, thanks for bringing this very timely business topic forward because it's something that I know we're all charged with, and it gives us a moment of pause and reflection to say, hey, it's not where there was any nefarious intent, but as we start moving forward with this, are we doing our due diligence? Fully vaccinated, sorry, I freak everybody out, right? I know, right? I'm like, I'm fully vaccinated. But what I would say, I know that in the store.
I do too, but I'm like, looking for the nearest exit.
That happens every time. Sorry. No, I promise. Okay, sorry. No, so a couple of thoughts I can share with you. I know as we work across the state and local, we try to go in this to make sure that we have equal representation when we work. So the first thing that we try to do is to make sure that our state technical advisory committee, we have subcommittees that can help us really go in and carve out some of these critical conversations. Where we're represented, where we're missing the mark, and how do we close those gaps. So what we try to do is to go in and to identify where we have the unserved populations here within the state, and making sure that we have that level of engagement. So where we have those inroads within our tribes, as well as now our First State African American producers, as well as our Hispanic, our Hispanic community, we know that there are still additional opportunities for us, whether it's beginning farmers, our women producers, and beyond. So what we're trying to do is to now bring those individuals into these internal discussions and doing the very same thing that Jen is looking at carving out to make sure that we have those continuous engagements. So whenever I do go into those dialogues, I'm bringing all of you with, whether it's through the district, our association, our partners represented around the room. And this way now they realize that the conversation is not just indicative to the federal side of the house, but now for the entirety of local working ag here in the state. So you can do it with me in every single dialogue and discussion. But I'd like to say, we do have one of our co-chairs right here with us for our First State African American producers and peers. And she's done a really good job of helping us engage and inform and provide the training opportunity with those producers. And then of course now looking at how do we go in and expand. So we've been also working with Jonathan Daniel, who's over the small farm program at Dell State University, going through the extension service. A lot of it, guys, we don't have to go in and reinvent the wheel. We can just simply utilize resources that are already in place and making sure that now we use that as a conduit to help us address what we see are the goals that we want to set here as a profession. And then from there, now invite those individuals into a discussion to say, this is what we're looking at carving out. We want to make sure it's going to be overarching intent. I agree with Kevin. We have to be very cautious with this and not create a vision without those individuals being represented. Because we want to make sure we have a good understanding of what is the collective need. How are they engaging? Why are they not engaging if they're not participating? And is it at a point now where we're able to? So sometimes it may be just simply the timing of our meetings and how we're doing this is just not going to work. So getting a better understanding of how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and what's going to meet their needs really becomes a conversation. So we pulled all of that back into an overarching strategy for us that, again, we continue to evolve, continue to test and make sure it makes sense. But again, it's something that we adjust on a quarterly basis, and then we come back to those groups and say, so here's what we prescribe from our training, from our programmatic rollouts, to how we go out and do our technical resource assessment, as well as follow up. Is this working? If they say yes, wonderful. Let's figure out why. For those who haven't participated, let's figure out why. It may be that, again, it's not so much that I just trust you, Casey, but there's a historical impact that has now created a level of concern for participating. So I'll stop here, Jim. But, again, I really applaud the district. This is a huge step. And again, it goes back to your commitment for voluntary conservation here in the state. So thank you.
You have something, Dave? Do you have something else?
Thanks, everyone.
Anybody else have anything to? Anything else?
Yeah, real quickly, I piggyback on what Kevin and Casey said. I think, very diligent, small steps in the beginning, itemizing the diversity that you already have. Working in agriculture, that's always difficult. Our commission touts diversity in agriculture. Various industries within agriculture represented in a very meaningful way. And identifying that for the association, I think, would be a great first step. And then emphasizing what Casey said about understanding why certain people did not become more engaged partners is a really easy thing to jump out and collect that information and identify with the people that are at the table what adjustments may be able to be done in order to facilitate those people, joining in the future. It's a small state and it's a tight knit industry. Those are those, but at the same time, we can also use them for.
Well, Kenny, do you have anything to add to the Great Management Commission?
This is new territory for me. So, just listening and absorbing it. I'm getting ahead of it.
From Denmark, we've been working with diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice from the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership. So in 2014, the Chesapeake Bay Agreement was signed, and with that came a diversity outcome. So the Bay Program decided to take a look at their representation across the watershed. So who are their leaders, who are the folks that are on work groups, and decided to create goals to increase diversity within the partnership. Moving that forward, they have now developed a diversity plan and diversity strategy that outlines exactly what diversity means and how we're going to implement that in the partnership, and then also giving some key themes for the jurisdictions within take home. So things that the states could start implementing on that. And Secretary Garvin just earlier signed an action statement for the DEIJ work that's being done in the Bay program. So it may be something, a value that you guys can look at. We have formed an EJ community or an EJ committee within the departments to look at how our programs are now affecting EJ communities. So, and then how we can try and work a little bit better with our divisions in our programs on EJ issues, because some people have funding for that while others may not, and just trying to work a little bit better across lines. One other thing that I would like to say is, as we're getting information from the Bay program and our EJ committee, we're having a hard time trying to understand that and then incorporate that into what we're doing. We were provided funding through the Bay Program Partnership, $5,000 a year to address issues solely within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. But we're having a hard time doing that because we don't know who the trusted leaders are in these communities, and a lot of our goals are not exactly what aligns with what our goals for them. So we're trying to work with a group called Health Initiative. They have been doing a lot with home safety, home energy, just trying to find any organization that we could work with. So I'm glad to hear about the Hispanic lead there. I mean, take advantage of that. But just trying to get, understanding exactly what it is that they want and not trying to push our message to these communities. Really what I'm struggling with, and I think many of us more are. Oh, and I have one more. Okay. So we had, one of the other things that we were talking about, and Tim, you may appreciate this, that with the shortage of engineering staff, the EPA and Delaware State University signed an agreement to offer interns for different organizations within Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. So one of the things that I'm exploring is looking into offering internships and seasonal opportunities in the summer through this MOA. So targeting those individuals who are primarily underserved in low-income areas, not had the opportunity that some of the other folks that would be actively applying for some of our seasonal and intern jobs would be. So working through that MOA and hopefully trying to do that with a focus on engineers this summer. So if you guys want to try and work on that with me, I'd appreciate it. I know. We'll see. Fingers crossed.
I'd just like to say I'm really happy just to have the conversation. I think it's a start. And we're all learning. So I think sharing all this, we're all here.
Having everybody feel included in the conversation, I guess, is the first step. That letting them know they have a voice in what happens.
I think from my perspective, that gives me a few guidelines and a few points to follow up. So it sounds like I'm happy to kind of follow up with individuals in the room and maybe work and understand a little better some of the efforts that are already underway and some individuals to contact that are outside of our usual audience, and then maybe see if it's possible to draft a statement as a starting point for this effort.
Jimmy, you got anything?
I think this is the day to start that. Definitely.
Well, thank you all for your input. Excellent conversation, I would say.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And if you do need any help,
Yeah.
if you do need any help as you're going through this, please let me know. The statement has mostly been our main technical looking at outreach and advocacy, how we're engaging, so we can loop her into this as well as how we can share out here our that we work with the tribes, to our African American producers, to our own ag, all the way through. And then also, I would love to get contact for it.
Okay.
And making sure that now we can.
Yep, I will ask. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm caught up.
I guess the next topic is the cover crop workload analysis. Debbie, you do have input on it?
Let me unshare and switch over here.
That's sure paper minutes, so.
This is all online. Yeah, or at least all on the computer here. Let's see, I can close this. In theory, I can close that. And let me go up. So I'm going to start here with I had given a short presentation last week when meeting with dynamic leadership and also to the Nutrient Management Commission. So since this is the first time that this group has seen anything on this, I wanted to start with that same presentation and then I can dive in with the spreadsheet itself, the analysis. So this one is short. It was just to introduce kind of the methodology that we used and some of the initial results. Weird, like I'm looking at you guys and I'm also. Okay. So with the cover crop workload analysis, what we did is we put together a spreadsheet where we outlined 34 tasks associated with the cover crop program. And asked all of the staff that touches on the program, whether they were managers, planners, admin staff, accountants, or the outreach coordinator in Sussex County, to identify the hours or estimate the hours that they had spent working on each of these 34 tasks. So we also worked with each of the districts to determine what the average compensation rate was for each of those employees, and then apply the hours with that rate. Okay, so we had three categories of costs and activities. So in part one of this analysis, we looked at activities that don't really fluctuate very much, no matter how much funding is available or how many acres. So, preparing for the program and things like that. We had a second category where we looked at activities that do fluctuate with the number of acres and the amount of funding. So going out and certifying plantings, and construction and making payments and things like that. And then we had a third category that outlined the supplies and equipment for the program. Oh, I didn't share this again. Sorry for those of you on the phone. Let me work on that. Is that gonna mess it up?
Yeah, if you move it there.
It does? Okay, can I move this over there? No, it doesn't seem like it worked.
You have to reshare this screen again, Jim.
Okay.
Okay.
Knock that out. I'm going to share my screen. Move this over here.
There you go.
All right, we're gonna get there. All right, so.
Turn the right screen and pull up the other PowerPoint.
Oh, that's right. It's gonna split. Okay, we'll move this back over here. We'll get there.
You're good, Jim.
But now you gotta pull up the cover crop.
I thought we moved all of those earlier. Why, where did the correct PowerPoint go? I'm usually way better with computers, guys. I swear.
There you go.
All right.
This slideshow.
Okay. I'll take it. Okay. All right. So going over that first part, remember I divided things into three different cost categories. So things that don't fluctuate with the number of participants in fields and acres. Looking at activities to prepare for the program, updating guidelines, policies, fact sheets, budgeting guidelines, providing technical assistance. So obviously these aren't black and white categories. We do spend more time providing technical assistance if we have lots more funding and acres, because we have more people who are interested in the program. But this kind of gives us at least a general thing to go off of. But in technical assistance, we're looking at answering questions about the program and working with producers on cover crop management options, species selection, things like that. Executing the program. So there we're looking at compiling data for the board to approve and developing the final CAP scenarios. Quality assurance, quality control with the data. So following up with landowners on inspection issues that we find out in the field. Looking for duplicative program participation. So somebody can't be enrolled in a Farm Bill program on the same acreage that they're enrolled in one of the district cover crop programs. So that's what we're looking at in that. And then individual entity and trust resolutions, so making sure business entity issues that we're resolving those, and other QHUC on the data itself, just to make sure that everything is entered in correctly and we haven't, there's no glaring omissions or mistakes in the data collected. So we also look at processing payments, and then important, we're looking at grant writing and contracting and reporting on all the different funding sources that we receive to support the program. So that's part one. In part two, some of the things that do fluctuate depending on how much funding we have. There's preparing folders and sending out reminders to people to participate and stop into the office, and working with those landowners to actually enroll their acreage in the program. At planting and termination, there's the time to go out and do field checks, do the data entry, and mail and process those certification forms. And then at payments, some of the payments, do fluctuate with the number of participants. So generating payment requests and tax. Okay, and then in supplies and equipment, we have the office supplies, iPad costs to do the data collection in Kent and Sussex counties, mileage to go out and do the inspections, and advertising for the program. So any questions on the first part there? Okay. So we made some assumptions. This is an estimate, first and foremost. So one of the assumptions there is that we assume $45 an acre average for crops. It varies a little bit in each county or near late planting. Sometimes there's aerial, an incentive compensation for aerial applications, but we kind of used a straight shot for the estimating purposes. It's worth noting that these activities were estimated at the end of the season rather than captured and tracked throughout the cover crop program. So these are at the end of the season what people estimated that they spent during the past year on the program. We looked at indirect costs that are estimated based on an average between 10%, which is that default minimum rate, and 40%, which is a rate that we're familiar with for some of our partners. So we kind of split the difference when it came to indirect costs and used a rate of 25% on that. Some of the things that aren't included include the timekeeping costs. So it involved in this workload analysis in general, but then also if we were to use a model like this going forward and we can start keeping track of everything, there's some accounting and additional administrative costs that go along with that. And we also haven't really looked at any of the costs associated with the USGS projects regarding remote sensing for cover crops and the time to implement that methodology within our verification efforts. So I did change, for Denmark and the Nutrient Management Commission, you'll notice that I did make a change from when I talked with you guys in terms of a multiplier for that indirect rate, because as I was able to talk with the districts about it. What we were talking about with that was really, kind of a different category of indirect costs. And so instead of having it as a separate piece. So just an update real quick on where we are with the conversations with USGS. So all of the districts had met with Dean Hively and his team to discuss the results of the remote sensing for the 2019 and 2020, and then this past year for the cover crop years. And so in those conversations, it does seem like there's good potential to use the remote sensing data kind of within the spring termination checks because it's not so time sensitive. They can tell us about when somebody terminated a cover crop in relation to when the farmer said they did, and it's not important to be able to get out there within the first couple of weeks to make sure that happens. We just need to know that the cover crop didn't go to harvest. In the fall, it's a little trickier because there's a little bit of a time sensitive factor. It takes a couple of weeks between when a cover crop is planted and emergence for the satellites to be able to pick it up in their imagery. And then it takes a couple more weeks to turn it around where the team looks at it and runs that analysis and gets it back to the districts. So it's not to say that it can't be used at all in the fall, but it's just the time factor makes that a little trickier, especially for counties that do an early planting and a late planting. And that also doesn't really take into account if you have cloudy days in there. So they have to have clear sky to be able to see the ground, and take that satellite imagery. And it also doesn't really account for dry weather that has delayed emergence of the cover crop as well. So there's a lot of factors that go on in the fall, is my point there. So all of the districts agree that we need to do additional ground truthing and training for the district staff to understand how to use the data and make sure that it's a good fit for the county and we know what we're looking at. And just going back to what we're talking about here with the workload analysis, the direct cost assessment here doesn't account for the cost of the USGS, the remote sensing, and the time that goes into utilizing that. So I put this in here after the conversations last week, where I wrote down the time that had gone into the cover crop program, just because I think we tend to think of the cover crop program as being a time cost that falls primarily on the planners. And so as it breaks down into hours, about 2/3 of the time spent on the program is the planning staff, but 20%, 19% is spent on the program by the administrative staff, management. 12% of all of the hours that go into the program are spent by the management staff, and a little tiny bit by the accountants and the outreach coordinator in Sussex. And then, I think that this question had come up in both the meetings that I had last week, so I just wanted to spend a minute to talk about the indirect costs that we have there. Obviously, that goes into building and rent and utilities, keeping the lights on. But there are a lot of costs that the districts incur that aren't reflected if you're just looking at the direct costs associated with the program. Okay, so there's training and professional development, primarily for the planners, when we're looking at the crop management tool and soil health field days and things like that. There are partnership meetings. So without kind of naming all of the examples that go into that, but this is one, so everybody who is on salary with the districts here, this isn't something that falls under one of our agreements. And so just in the past week, for me, I've had a call with NREC leadership, we've had budget calls, the Nutrient Management Commission, meetings on the remote sensing project, and all of those are kind of things that fall outside of an existing agreement. And collectively, if we're looking at all of us in the room, those meetings are super important, but we probably attend too many of them. There's thousands of meetings that occur throughout the year that need to be captured somewhere. So there's administration, the admin staff, the accounting staff, preparing for board meetings and local work groups, applying for grants and agreements. There's HR services to recruit and hire employees, and HR management for the current employees. They're keeping up with COVID guidelines. You know, these are just sort of all things that fall outside of the cover crop program or, you know, the 319 funding and things like that that we're trying to account for in the direct costs. So with that, I'm going to step out of this, I think, and I will go ahead and open up the spreadsheet that we've been looking at so that you guys can take a look at what goes into that. Are there any questions, though, to the slides, those introductory slides?
The other question I had basically, and looking at what you put out there, was you're trying to evaluate the cost of the program, not like with the remote sensing and all that. We're not doing it. We don't know the cost of training, equipment, things like that.
Right.
So you are not trying to put together a number with a program that somebody else may want. It's not what we're doing. We're just trying to evaluate the cost of the program that we currently administer, correct?
I am, but I'm also trying to make the point that we can't just move this spreadsheet. Will that work? All of a sudden.
Okay, that's all. It was a yes or no question. That was a yes.
Right.
Right.
But I am also trying to make the point that we can't just accommodate the direct costs.
Correct.
There we go.
Correct. Looking at other ways to do it, I'm part of it all, doing what we're doing.
This is slightly painful, but all right. So let's see. Here's I put this together, looking at this in two ways, and unfortunately, I know it's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of data, so I'm just kind of going over what this looks like in general, right? It's wider than I have room for, so I'll kind of take a tour here. So what I've done is I've put a lot of calculations into the sheet. That these are the 34 tasks that people were asked to evaluate. You can see it doesn't have hours in here. It has the time, or it has the cost associated with that because I've applied everybody's hourly rates that go with that. It looks more exact than it is. I don't know. I can't say for sure that planners spend $91 worth of hours on individual entity trust resolution. Should you say this with a grain of salt? You know, these are estimates. But I figured by breaking these down into individual categories, it might provide for a more exact estimate than going everybody and saying, what did you spend on? You know, you had to think about how much time you spend on these individual activities, that you'd come up with something more exact. So that was part one. Part two, they did it sort of by the minute, and then it was compiled the same sort of way. That changes based on the number of acres and producers and things that we have enrolled in the program. And then here was everybody's office supplies and vehicle mileage and the advertising for that. Okay. So if you change one of the numbers in yellow, if we change it from 110,000 to something else, it'll update all of the numbers in the spreadsheets. If we talk about reducing the number, the percentage of field checks in the fall or in the spring, it'll change everything again. Okay. So over to the right, this is kind of all the summary information there that goes along with that. So we've got what is a result of the direct salary and fringe and those other direct costs in the bottom part of the spreadsheet. We calculate the indirect costs that are associated with that based on what we talked about before. And so the total estimated cost to administer the program given these figures. Okay. And then we break that down a little bit into different categories. So out of the total cost to run the program, this is how much goes into the cover crop cost share paid to farmers at $45 an acre. And then this is kind of how those tasks break out into different categories and the time cost associated with each acre with that. Okay. And so 110,000 acres, the total cost of the program there is $49.62 an acre. And the operating cost as a percent of the total cost there, it comes up to 9.3%. I'm going to show you one more thing, and then we can go back and kind of answer any specific questions and change things around. So I also looked at it in terms of a pie chart. So again, this one, I think this one is 97,800 acres because that was reflective of kind of the acreage that we can pay for out of this current year's funding. And so what we have with that, I'm trying to squeeze everything in there. So $45 per acre paid to farmers in the form of cost share, $4.83 to administer the program. And so how that breaks down in terms of the pie. So $1.44 out of that goes to verification, 15 cents to processing payments, 39 cents to grant writing and reporting, you know, and so.
While you're right there, you've got 483 is actually like 10.5%. But you said that you used a reduced number of acres because that's what the money that we have.
Well,
So you originally had 9.3%, but you're saying there the cost is actually a little higher than that with less acres. So we're still bouncing around at 10%, just to verify that.
yes.
Well, we're using round the numbers, like you said, you know, the way we reach the estimate, we're still in that ballpark. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, so if we get less funding, like in past years where we've gotten the 1.7 million in conservation cost share.
Yeah, the fixed costs are there,
Right.
so with less acres,
Right.
you know, the overall cost as a percentage is a little higher. Okay, that's just what I was verifying.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I thought the 110,000 you were using was kind of optimistic.
That was what we did in the 1 year.
Okay.
Yeah, in that 1920 year where we had additional funding, we planted with all the funding sources together about 111,000 acres. So that was like a really good year.
Yeah.
So, and that 483 as a part of the overall cost, this is what I wanted to grab my calculator because that's 9.7% of the overall cost. So if you add those two pieces together, then it's 9.7% of the program cost. So I think I did have one more slide, but basically it was just that the costs are preliminary, or this assessment is preliminary. I wanted everybody here to be able to see it and evaluate it and ask questions before we kind of gave it the thumbs up today. It looks like about $5 million is the inflection point where that 10% admin is the right amount. You know, so if we have less than $5 million in cost share, then our operational costs, our direct costs are higher. If we get more than that, then you know the economy of scale really starts to kick in, and we can probably go with a different model on how to charge those administrative or overhead costs.
But Jen, one of the things that the model showed along these lines is that there are these acres, but we do have some efficiencies that are built in.
Correct.
So that more money, more money is making to the producers for their product.
Right. Yep. So, I'm happy to share this with anybody. If you all, you know, say that it's fine, where people can play around with the acreage and the savings to reduce, you know, verification and field verification efforts. I had some fun looking at those numbers myself, where I could plug anything in while we're here just to see what that looks like.
I first and foremost want to thank you for the time that you put into this, and the planners and other staff involved in it. Planning, Debbie, you probably have a portion of that workload, and you know some of our planners and your planners, you know, coming up with you know, I go, how long did I spend? Different things, you know, looking at time and things like that. So thank you, because I know this was, a lot of people were concerned with the time we were going to put into this. And I think we have a useful model here to justify our expenses. That gives us an idea of what our costs are. You know, because I think a lot of people say, well, I don't really know, you know, and you'll never have it exact. But this is, I think, a very useful model, and I would like to put forward that we share this with our partners. I don't know if you want a motion as such, or if so, I'm willing to do that. You know, that's where I'm at.
Any questions or any curiosities about any of the details in the spreadsheet?
Can you share whatever questions you had that came from the Unit Management Commission meeting?
The commission meeting, I mean, you guys didn't really, you wanted to see this before you really had additional questions. So if there were some questions behind the scenes that I'm not familiar with, I'm happy to answer those. And then you guys were in on the meeting with Senrec leadership, so you're familiar with it.
Well, I think, you know, neither the commission nor Denver, but this
Right, the full,
pie chart, you know, the
right.
high detail. You know, my recollection from the follow-up discussion we had Wednesday, that was a question. See for Chris. And the commission wanted some of the detail, which I think it is pie chart. You know, everything we marked yesterday, we were a pie chart, something to break out the components on that. I'm thinking this is very informative and illustrative. So.
Hey, Jen, one recommendation that I would have, if you would go back in and expound on the part for certification and to show what that certification means. And that all of our confirmation planners are doing this for our certified planners on the process.
Okay.
And if you need help with that, let us know, because we can get you that information.
I'm sure that I do.
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with lots of examples of training that the planners go through. And I have a sense of the amount of time, you know, that it takes. But I think that that's a good point. And, you know, I think it's sort of worth noting, you know, the importance of that, even though it's not reflected in the analysis itself, to have planners who are competent and, you know, able to answer those questions. I mean, they're all important pieces, but especially as it relates to the cover crop program. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a very important point, because I think we live in a day and age where everybody thinks everybody knows everything about everything. And that's just not the case. I mean, we do have specialized people who specialize things. And some of those specialties do take a specific amount of training and specific certifications, and the planning being certainly one of them, conservation planner. So I think that's very important, because any of us can sit at our desk and think that, well, yeah, you can just Google that. Yeah, that doesn't give you anything. When you're out in the field and you get asked a question from somebody, you gotta sound confident. They immediately start losing faith in not only you, but in the agency you represent your team. So we have certified planners doing this work. We don't have just people out there, you know, making check marks on the checklist.
And I mean, my familiarity is with the crop advisor certification, you know, you need 40 hours every 2 years just to maintain that certification. And I usually way overshoot in the number of soil and water credits that I have, and I struggle to get pesticide credits and things like that. So I usually end up with something like 80 credits, but most of them are soil and water. Yeah, and so that's an example that I'm familiar with. And I know a number of planners have. But that's different, Casey, than what you're talking about, which is, the actual planner certification.
For what would you think in the manual requirements of
And, what I don't know, based on this now, look at the district. My billable, so if I spend an hour on, it includes my salary, my healthcare, a percentage for electricity, a percentage for computer, there's a percent for, for basically everything we think it costs to run our shop. That's true of every employee who works for us. That's what the billable rate is. It's not just their annual salary divided by 1,900.
Well,
Okay.
to that point though, too, and Bruce and I in your office talked about this. So in the spreadsheet, we didn't use your billable rate. We used the average, the cost per employees, because of that difference that you're talking about, in terms of the building and being assigned there, we reflected those in the indirect costs. But in that conversation with Bruce, we were kind of figuring out, that was another big gauge of what those indirect costs would be, the difference between the billable rate and what the cost of it is.
Bruce and I had a brief conversation this morning, just because it's scheduled.
Right.
Yeah, so that way, so there's no double counting.
Right.
Which is
Right.
important.
I wanted to make sure that
I want to make sure too. So, which was one of Sean's concerns.
Right.
Hey, your team. So again, to echo Bruce's comment, it was creative.
Right. I appreciate everybody's help on that too.
And Kevin, in response to the double counting, that was a conversation that Jen and I had throughout the last week to 2 weeks as we were kind of starting to pick this apart constructively, just to say, all right, let's put some holes in it to see where they are and where they lead. And that was one of the obvious ones that we wanted to test. And make some adjustments to address some of the inconsistencies in there. We just got tighter and tighter as we moved along. Is it perfect? No, but it's been somewhat tested.
Well, I'll note this, folks, for Terry, for folks in the room, we've been dealing with NIFWA, National Fish and Wildlife. And they got $100+ million grant. What is their default admin rate? 10%. And you charge 10%. If you want something higher, you got to document it just. And so, this is a federal program. I think they're $400 million. And 10% not a lot, so I think there's some, information in that policy that we got to reflect on. Our partners work with us on this effort.
All right, so in the back of the room here, so we've got our kids in the back.
I'd like to make an observation. When this started, there was an accountability issue and nobody could really answer except for the expense or that it was just 10%. Well, when you came to the meeting last week, you addressed those concerns, and then with the work that you've done and the pie chart today, I'm grateful for that. You have a working plan to factor in cost. Secondly, for the sources that are donating the funds to the government. You know, accountability holds true no matter what you do. So when you can come up with a model like that, explaining cost, that ought to help the districts give accountability to those funds. And maybe since you do have it, being able to generate more funds because you have a plan. Because I don't know if you even had this broken down prior to that question there in the spring. I don't know, but I am grateful that you spent that time. That goes a long way. And secondly, the fact that you're even talking about some of these newer technologies to help labor issues are big in our work. So technology, technical advances that have to make up difference. And the fact that you're exploring it, that was the second point that was brought. Accountability and integrity is the 2 points brought forward and you're addressing.
Well, I'm glad you went first, so I can say. I think this is laudable. It's really an exceptional analysis. I mean, what I can see from
Right.
I trust that it's there.
By design.
Yeah, I can tell. I can tell. I think the illustrative as, for me. And came around the table first. But, to Tim's question, I think you mentioned last week, this presentation of the slideshow, David Brad. There's going to be a lot of comfort in being able to see this detail. And, the timing of things is always unfortunate, but I think with this kind of information, we can go back to commissioners that were really interested, maybe have an ad hoc subcommittee or one because it's his job, and just dive into that a little bit with your government. But I think it's great. I did have one question. Seeing all this and a lot of it being new, I think it's really interesting to find that $5 million inflection point for the 10%. But looking at pie charts we have today, it looks like the sensitivity is not that great. And by that, I mean, if we have 4 million, we have 6 million, we're still playing with pieces of 1%, the way that it moves. I just want to confirm that.
Well, here, the easiest thing to do is kind of to change it. So, say when we had, something more like 1.7 million and an average cover crop acreage was, more like 50,000, if we cut it in half. Yeah, I had to show this part because this was the cool part. Right, but then we're looking at 331,000 and at the bottom, so then we're looking at the total operating, or the operating costs being closer to 13%. So, we can look at it if we come up with something closer to the 250 or 260,000 acres that we have as like a goal for the state.
The Democrats was getting a real bargain when we didn't have as much money. I mean, they were. I mean,
If you take this model, that's true. But I wanted to talk to some of the folks at the district. This is a snapshot of time, so everybody reflected on last year.
Right.
Is 13% if we cut the thing by more than half? Does that feel right, or do you think it's less than that?
Well, I think it kind of speaks into there's a certain amount of effort that goes into running the program in general, so that part one, the fixed cost, that there's just a certain number of man hours that go into
Any
it.
of the theory.
Right.
I mean, I spent many years earlier in my career playing with models, so this is.
Right.
If just considering that inflection point that you showed us, and talking about a couple scenarios that are close to what happened when DEA splashed the pot, so to speak, and then we also have the COVID financial implications. It just wasn't that much movement. So I wondered if, we were going to have to drag this back to the table if $6 million showed up.
Right. I mean, it's a good question to ask. And so we thought through some of that, and it would probably be good to kind of take another look as well. I mean, it's not sensitive in the sense that it goes from like 20% to 5% or something, but it does fluctuate some.
And so a follow up, I think, again, not being able to see the detail, that all of this was focused on the cover crop program, which is the most robust program in terms of outreach and working with landowners. The number of landowners involved here, vastly overshadows, I think, the other menu of BMPs that the districts offer. Do we have any sense of what those other things look like? With an analysis where it's cover crop everyone overhead. I have an intuitive sense, but I just wondered what you guys, whether that was part of the discussion when you put this together.
Not for me.
And the reason I asked, since he's not here, but I'm going back to the office and probably is, his sense, Michael Skeets, secretary, his sense was that cover crops is a cheap approach. It can be done with less effort, dragging people to the table, so to speak, to get them signed up for a bunch of things. Let's just use any good contract as an example. There's a lot of diligence involved in that, where, the perception is for cover crops, you can kind of just show up to the feeding truck and participate, and you have some experience doing this probably. Most of the people that participate have experience doing it year after year, and things get easier with experience.
Well, I think at a 30,000 foot level, that's how it.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Okay, but I think this analysis tends to document is that there are a lot of things, to what appears to be sign up at the drop. I think that sentence, translates to, I think Newcastle has a more diverse caution program at this point than the other districts. In part because all of their funds go to cover crop, all of our funds go to cover crop. And so, delivering those other cost share programs to individuals is just as intense. In some cases, because of the engineering design for a structure, even more expensive. So, I think this is a good, educational document, for folks who don't understand, who don't have the experience in the program, what it really means. An effective and responsible program, and that looks out for the public investment in private citizens. Responsibly and environmentally beneficial. That's win-win.
It's flagship.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Can I guess what I was trying to paraphrase, it seemed to me that you were asking that might this program, because of the largeness of it, be even less expensive to run on a per user cost or overall cost than some of the other. Like this might be a minimum cost. Is that kind of what you were asking our managers?
Exactly.
With the amount of money and the amount of producers that are familiar with the program, that this might be, in retrospect, a almost very minimum cost for other programs. Without getting into detail, I'm doing this exact analysis. Assume that maybe based on time spent. for non-producers, that's a question. And soon, this might be almost a minimum cost for our program.
I mean, on a day-to-day basis, yeah. I mean, I spend a lot more time dealing with other, let's say RC&D. RC&D, I spend a ton of time on it as a there.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
I have a sense that that's the case, and somebody called and said, we got $2 million. What can we do, really efficiently? I think all three of you guys would say, cover crop first.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Good. In that regard,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Because we're making assumptions and, minimizing a lot of things.
Right, we have to go out and do a conflict. That takes a lot more time. A lot more training.
The money spent.
Yeah, compare it to what we're doing. Versus on the Amherst.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a process that is built in, not a lot of us. If you compare these two people, we see the cover crop program is a lot. It's significant.
Our costs, per dollar and per.
There may be some advantages to technology in the future, but my experience with technology is they usually break it up in places they can get to what they think you would done otherwise.
Unfortunately.
It takes a while to get the savings out of it.
Somebody's got to get a good job.
Anything else on this before we move on?
It sounded pretty good.
All right.
Job well done.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Do you want to introduce it?
I can't yet, because one of the requests for an agenda item from a conversation last week was, as a group here, that we could spend a little time, to discuss maybe some potential for, going back to our conversation earlier, like how can we increase adoption? Like what are the barriers to participation for some people? In the cover crop program, in conservation, and then I think we were specifically talking about cover crops, but like, are there things that we can do as a group that where we can work together to get a beat on what we're missing and where those opportunities are to increase adoption, whether we're looking at ways to enroll new producers into the program that haven't participated so far, or additional acres from current participants. And so that was the gist of what we were talking about. If we could spend some time on the agenda today to talk about an effort, like a partnership effort. And again, are there people that we can work with, like Farm Bureau or others, to identify some of those opportunities. I'll stop there because, for the people who were in on that call, if you guys had any additional comments on that, bring this up before we get started with that discussion. That was it. Okay. I guess I captured it all right.
Were you guys thinking of going out and doing this first initially, and then pulling that back together, and then coming in and I was doing listening sessions? So I'm thinking kind of mimicking it behind what we did with the CCP, and when we get there, we get a survey, we have listening sessions where we go in and flesh out what we saw were those pain points, things that worked very well, and how we could adapt that into a new improved process. And then from there, now we start building that into a strategy and timelines and roles and responsibilities, all of that now outlining it to make sure we have a good way of rolling out the process. Like you said, this is a large conversation. It's not one group's responsibility, it's all of ours. So I think if we like an RDS program, everybody got like the original stuff. So, only doing that there. So to hear that and then to be able to share that back, my point is back to the national office and see where the things are or if that's how fast it change. And we have to the front end language. But I can use myself as an example, but that would be something we really flesh out and see how we really expand this because we want it to not only address the law, but really get to a point where we're starting to increase more of that carbon matter virtual health and what we've got here in partnership. So just know what we were thinking, if we're thinking more or sessions or something to that extent.
From our conversation, I did get the impression that that was the kind of thing we were talking about, right?
Besides stakeholder outreach,
Yeah.
because I think surveys have proven to be their own tool. Really engage people that like to fill out surveys, sometimes that tanks around. But I will say that there's been some outreach done by the Delaware Maryland 4R Alliance, which I'm connected to, and they've been trying to identify barriers for cover crops. I think, the unfortunate side of, working with the district is most of the people surrounding you aren't even cool, right? So, surveying each other is not going to be helpful. Having you all serve in stakeholder role is not going to be as helpful as, drumming up some folks that really have avoided cover crops for whatever reason, figuring out what that is. So I would encourage engaging, Lindsay Thompson to join a stakeholder group, talk to the University of Delaware. Dave Forrester has been working on social science experiments, including surveys, but scientifically driven surveys, and also identify efficiencies in conservation, EMPs. And I think she'll have fantastic knowledge without having published anything yet, just to be able to help guide the conversation and at least spark off a couple ideas.
One of the things that I think is important when you're talking to people, trying to encourage them, is to let them know what we're trying to achieve, what the milestone is per se. One of the questions I always struggle with, here's some more shine, is there a statewide goal for Congress? I think I've heard different numbers over the years, and then we look into some pollution control strategies, they have some numbers, all these numbers. So it's like we had a number of acres, 200,000 acres. What is that
I think the
number?
closest number we came across was one that was brought up in DC that time.
Which came from the whip, and the two previous whips, the third, useful as far. We hope when we produce the goal for cover crop was a real target. And we have a stakeholder group together for the agricultural side of the whip. Without having it in front of me, I want to say that number was on the order of 220,000 acres for the state.
And are those just Chesapeake acres?
They are not. That is statewide acreage. And as far as I can remember the conversation having had a few years ago, we were aiming for the USDA mass number of corn acres, which changes. I mean, soybeans have an increasing state, which has a level of complexity to get things planted by a deadline.
You would be able to add more PCS together because we're still.
Exactly.
So if 220,000 is convenient, go ahead and use it. If you want to use the old logic, go ahead and use it. There's no wrong answer. It's something more. Total and then get the year. Yeah, it's really cool programs. 'Cause you can always slow down. Yeah.
But the reality of it is that we're roughly half.
We're paying for acres to get us halfway there. I think we went out and had, I think the acre, we'd be even further past that.
Steve, interject a point to increase acreage. One of the limitations that we have is the time standard now. And I don't know when that standard was implemented, but things are changing. Falls and early winters are warmer. The technical advantages in the seeds themselves, the way they germinate, the farming practices themselves have changed. If the time frame was extended, say, to the 15th of November, or the earlier ones, the seeding rates were different because we're looking at biomass, root structures. Thinking on some of these new things with the climate change that we're experiencing, maybe extending the time frames would give more acres. I know that's a limitation with me, especially trying to get cover crops, soybeans. I still got beans that are solid green. So that leaf canopy is about to fall. There's no way I can put anything out there. And so, just with the extension and still being realistic so that you've got a green cover before winter sets in, you've got to meet that challenge. But I'm still thinking the cutoff is sort of a little early.
And some of your experts you had in meetings have addressed this to the degree that they said it's never too late to plant a wall. But you're going to get some advantage from it. Excuse me, the other thing I want to ask Bruce about, that if other people get into no-till practice, more years they get under their belt, don't you see more of a need for cover crops to keep that practice working well?
Well, see, it's a benefit. I don't know if it's necessary. I think it's a benefit. Yeah, it's a benefit. That's the thing I can say. To address this blessing, your farm, in our area, we don't get much. If we plant anything after the 1st week of November, we're not much green out of it. It's not that, like I say, there's still not a benefit. I think it's as far as trying to spend the dollars available wisely, it's better off trying to push people to do it early. If we have anything left over, then we'll see. I think we maybe need to adapt the program, maybe some other species of customers, maybe or work better. Personally, can't answer that.
Right, seems to be the most hard. The whole thing, my point, I guess I didn't explain it quite the way to. The more years you have land in no-till, it seems like compaction issues, what have you, greater. But tell us in that department also.
One of the things that when we were talking about the USGS data earlier and that analysis that was interesting, it was in one of the county meetings, I'm not sure I remember which one. But they look at, the greenness in different years and they can evaluate how the cover crops perform at different planting dates over time. In any given year, it's kind of too late by the time they know how well something performed, but if you can track that and look at that over a couple of years' time, sort of get a sense or a pattern of how, he mentions, I think he was talking about the early planting dates in one of the counties, and so it might have been Kent, but where he was talking about, for that early planting date, that something by like October 15th was appropriate in that year, that it had ample opportunity to green up, and that was a good cutoff. So maybe kind of looking at that data, familiar with it over time would help positions too. of an interesting thing, because I have, like, the way that the research comes out sometimes, I feel like I have a more solid answer to that question than is reality. You know, like after November or October 31st, I'm like, no, you can't do anything, you know, and it just depends on the year and a lot of the seeding rate and all of that kind of stuff.
Listening to some of the feedback. Future conversations that we. Farms that are already familiar with the program. Farms that just haven't tried.
Yes.
Or I'm trying, but at this point, that failed experiment is too old to really influence future management. Try to get issues of non-conference separate from, driving people who already know the benefits and are limited by programs. Because, we're all here to change water quality, not make necessarily. November 15th, winter peak crop is not really going to save the day. I hate to say it. I like to see them, but it's not going to move the needle. At least there's no evidence to suggest that. So, I just want to stay focused a little bit on that as we try to solve the problem for the people who are already doing a really good job.
No, I've had some phone calls over the years, people that are wondering, somebody mentioned this cover crop program, what do you know about it? From smaller landowners that, maybe got 100 or 200 acres that they're doing. Even they, just steering them towards that, making sure that the guy that's doing my hair occupation knows that, get more money from you guys. Hey, this customers know that, this program is available and it's a good thing. We can do outreach through mailings and posters and all that stuff. But a lot of times, just group need to, I'm a conservationist. That's why I'm here. Let's get it on the ground. Turn the light switch off when you leave the room.
I have a question. I think I know we know who signs up for our programs, but do you have any idea who that group could be that does not?
Not a good feel for it. We just know that they don't pay the government programs, so. But we're talking to people that are coming. There's talk, today about using the root sensing to do an overlay, see where those acres are that don't have cover crops. And we do, outreach to those folks. And the people that are planting small grain aren't coming to our program. So they're still cover on the ground. They can't participate in our program, so they don't come in. Or they sign up, if they can't participate, they can't count the acres. We have a lot of so we can't count.
Last 3 years when we've been involved in this program, we haven't had a fall season go live, which made it. Boy, that volunteer corn looks pretty good out there.
Well, in Sussex, we did change our late date to November 15th. Almost November 1st, but then it ended up in those got October, we ended up extending it, I think, the last 4 out of
4 out of 5 years.
Yeah, so we had extended it, but with no extensions possible. So I've seen crops be planted on the 7th or 10th of November that did green up. We get warm spells in the summer and the winter now that, old time state they never had. And then, of course, we're spreading manure in the spring. That's more root mass and stuff to capture the nutrients before it runs, stuff and running into the ditches. So we'll see how it goes. We were hoping, of course, it would help our sign-ups as well, but I'm just wondering if there's a way to reach reach out to those that we have less people who aren't, people walking through the door. Obviously, not the ones like this.
I mean, we have a mailing list that we sent out to the original that started as well, building from. I think it was FSA. And I can't remember where we got it. Was it FSA or was it?
It was, it came through NAS, but it was, you don't have that mailing list. You put together the postcards, and then they sent them out to their mailing list.
They don't share the right? I think we did it.
Yeah.
Stays, but if they're not participating, that was the program. They're not gonna
Yeah, I don't think they share that anymore.
have. No, I don't think so.
I'll give you a good example. I'm just thinking earlier, you were talking, somebody told me yesterday, somebody who participated in the cover crop program. I'm guessing he's got 80 acres, but they haven't harvested his corn yet. He was asking, the neighbor was asking me, like, well, how do you incorporate broadcast your, cover crop? Because I guess he didn't have fertilizer, which is how I do it. And there's a neighbor that actually got this year, I don't think he's ever participated before, but he did get, the guy harvests his corn to broadcast it for him. So I think there are still some new people trickling in, but they've each got their own obstacle to overcome. Something like, used to be, a lot of people don't know, you could grab a fertilizer spreader from like southern states. Well, see, you can't do that, or at least you can't down in America, they don't have to do it. So someone that doesn't have that opportunity to buy them, or work out some deal with a neighbor that can use it or do it for you. So there's just little things that could be holding people back.
Right. And yeah, I get it. This year we had 13 units. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
And we get a few each year. In our commercial or what?
Some of the states provides that service in our, they'll spread cover crop.
Charter.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly, some people don't want to pay.
It used to be you could just rent the spreader,
Or you borrowed it or
Yeah,
whatever.
right.
With the time involved, it's a big help.
Yeah.
They get it done fast.
Well, maybe we need to talk with southern states. Is there a way we can help you do business? Our business is. Well, I more acres. I mean, that's what we talked about last week. To, like diversity and inclusion, you gotta talk to the people you're trying to reach to find why they're not signing up, to understand, because otherwise, sometimes you just talk to the, go to the members of the employees.
Kevin, that was the very conversation we had when we first got into the air seat. Was, knowing we were pitching this to the board, I also had to have an exit strategy. And part of that was to build that air seater business up enough so maybe it becomes attractive. So when we service provider that would offer that as a service, because kind of during the dead period, in doing that, they just weren't there yet. Doesn't mean that they won't be, especially dollars are there to help support it or more interest from the farming community and the demand for that service.
Well, as most of you recall, there was a time when nobody had no-till drills, so the districts rented a no-till drill. We still ours. I don't think it can substitute that anymore. That's great, but maybe there's, either rent or. Yeah. Especially for the small, small acre. Probably have our business. Obvious, farmers who got 10 acres.
When we talk about the barriers, one of the biggest things out there that folks struggle with is just the time of year. It's just when do you physically get it done? Well, people's time is a premium. even more so the smaller, because market.
Yeah, they're working on it.
I don't know what they charge, but it should be as much as spread program. The acre that they can cover it, 100 pounds an acre, and the speeds that they ride, I mean,
It's still $8 an acre.
Yeah.
But I don't know the question of our own private rock program, but your programs, but I'll share for other states, put it for $8.
Well, they are, in the cost of, what we're paying for $40 or $50, that's pretty much steep off application. I mean, I'm paying an airplane, $16.50, or $20, I've heard it, somewhere between $15 and $20, depending on your relationship with the government. So I'm paying, and I'm doing that, and, we've added on the Senate to get it done, getting, I feel worth it, getting the benefit. Because we're doing 4 acres, and blessing mentioned, struggle with getting bees harvested, and why we plant bee acres, and wish we hadn't. But in corn, we go early, look at the weather, we're gonna get covered, and you were paying, I mean, the state is giving me money to pay money in a good way. That's what I'm doing, and that's what I would recommend to somebody else. You can save a little money if your corn's already harvested, sure, pay somebody to spread it or spread it yourself, but you're gonna pay $8 to $10,
So some very areas now, airplanes will do it. Anything that's covered with 3 sides.
with houses,
Not all, you do there, because there's certain places they will not. do it.
state and little build houses where I am.
You're not. Allowing you to do it.
So far for my action items here, I have talking to Lucy Thompson and Janelle McHenry and Leah Paul Forrester for certain points to help guide the conversation. Is there anything else that we need to take away? I mean, everybody's bringing up really good points that we have.
Looking for new, cooperators, I guess, is the problem we get.
And maybe that ties in with the other conversation.
Again, I'll date myself. Back in the day, something like an outreach like this, never. I remember DDA that you always had to interact with the Farm Bureau and the Grange. Okay? And it was like this wholly tricky. You didn't go talk, you didn't talk to the farmer, you didn't go out and talk to farmers because, you got plucked in the head. And I think about where we're at. The mission has standing, we have standing, but I still think we need a connection. I think the Grange is not what it used to be. I really don't know, to be honest. But I know the farm is, a very influential organization. Thinking about reach to producers who don't play in our sandbox, included the commission and DACD, local districts, and the Farm Bureau as the meeting sponsors, just to meet and greet and talk about and then come across programs. And what would it take, for you to sign up, or how can we improve that program? A lot more. I think that might be, something that would stimulate participation, which is what.
It's a great point. It's not hard. And we got to table. It's a matter of patience.
But I think,
5, 6, 7 of us don't show up to hear what you have to say.
but I think it's important, because I learned, Kenny talks, Bruce talks, Richard talks, Joel, it needs to be farmers talking to farmers. As much, I mean, we can be there taking notes, but it really needs to be, farmers saying, I didn't sign up because of this, and my Bruce says, well, have you thought about doing it this way? And there's credibility that, I know I can. Whereas our board members have that, knowledge and, life experience, which is really so beneficial in conversation.
Well, you said an mouthful there, and that's, let's face it, that's what the districts created on, was the local experts, which are our board members. That's what districts were built specifically for that purpose. So, yeah, you said a mouthful.
And there's one thing that we've learned over the years doing our school workshops, farmers listen to farmers. And that's what they want to hear.
And Chris is the most intelligent person in the room most of the time, but farmer will look at Chris as a paid employee. I don't look at him as another farmer. Every day in the dirt, have lived it, seen the trials and tribulations and all that.
I've never been so confused by it.
Sounds very intelligent.
From America. Ron Parker. That's supposed to. We've done it, right?
I articulated the next steps there. I will share out the spreadsheet. I think everybody seemed like they were okay with that. And so I would just ask to see if there are any additional things while we're all together to bring up for the good of the group. And I'll go pick them up.
If you're gonna send hard copies of that rather than to people that just want to flip through the pages, send 2 examples.
Okay.
Send a lower acre example. Okay, that's my only request. Anybody have a problem with that? Because I'm surprised that number is low, because everybody wanted to be, we had some problems with the 10% happening. And I think this is an example that they may be getting a bargain about, or it depends on the program. And you can't take these numbers into another program, but you can look at this and say, we're not trying to take advantage. Even with the higher numbers, we're still not taking advantage. And I think that's what I can feel in some of the discussions that maybe somebody thought that we were. So.
But really, there was only 1%.
No, there was other discussions and other people that wanted to know where we came up with a number. So we said, we don't know, we just think we're giving you a bar. And that's where I was, like Kevin said, here's the minimum rate for this one organization. Yeah, but why would that be our?
I feel comfortable.
Yeah, I'm very
I feel comfortable with all 3 minutes. I think we sort of stood firm and said, okay, call spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's come out the way it is, just because it makes us look like, okay, we
Actually, some of them do, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
A lot of good work done to do that.
But it was everything.
Yeah, I'm gonna go pick it up while, if there's anything else, you guys can kind of talk.
Well, I'm gonna ask this question. So, what would be, I don't think there'd be any harm, but why don't we try to schedule a joint briefing with Sean and Mike? Maybe senior leadership from DACD, Kenny from the commission, okay? Now, here's our conversation. You know, unless there's a clear, this point in our house. Open pride, and if we need to do some more work, okay, but then let's move on. Let's help us support. Within our field.
We've got something we can. 5 or 6 years.
I think that's a really important sooner rather.
I think from there, I can be a small group of people, and like I said, Sean, Michael. They have completed it, and we've done this, and we do it, because we just move forward and leave this thing alone for a little while. No, I don't think it needs to be 6 or 8 people. I think it needs to be, you know, maybe, like I said, the 3 administrators and them, and go from there. Have you done much?
I think we're nervous. Farmers expressed some animosity about the 10%, when they know it's bigger, you know.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of, you know.
Well, they look at the big one.
Yeah.
I think that was part, one of the secretary's things, is he was trying to get money from Bonneville to put into a program, and he wanted to say, oh, we're going to try to get as much of it on the ground. He was just throwing maybe random numbers. We might have thought we were throwing a random 10% number on there. But I think we've got it. There are.
And I think it's just to give farmers.
Yeah.
Well, and with USGS, most expensive cost of admin is the inspection. That, you know, I think we're all, we want the science to work. At this point, you can't tell weeds from cover. We got to find that science, and we'll bring that cost down.
But it's still only a small part of the whole thing. I mean, that's, you know,
I think it was, statewide, or just in Sussex, $75,000. Something like that was the verification piece. And, you know, the comment is, you know, to that point is that you're not going to, like, save something. You're not going to,
No,
training, lines, you know.
no, you're doing great. You're not going to get that. You'll see.
Stay moving.
A little bit for the integrity program. You're just not handing somebody money, you want to make sure that it's nothing back. Because there is 1% of people that's going to rip you off anytime. I don't care what where you're at, what you're doing. They're going to try to get you. Just look at the people who mess with the credit cards.
Glad you came. Yeah, it's important.
To address Mr. Snow's concerns about this, an ongoing thing. I think what was transpired today with Jen's presentation and what she introduced to us last week, this is going to resolve, because there's something that you can point to. And if the different agencies truly realize the benefit of the cover crops and the monies, what that dollar spent, what the return is, you know, it's a huge number compared to what tax dollars go with other things. The inclusion of more funding, I think it's, I don't know quite the sources, but some of these watershed initiatives like the Chesapeake Bay Initiative, for all I know, maybe the Delaware Inland Bays will come up with funding to implement some cost share. Who knows? But they've gone a long ways towards rectifying all that confusion that took place last spring. And nobody wanted to undermine what the districts were already doing. So, and, but there was a situation presented, we had to address the issues which you have done. And so I feel pretty good.
And then heck of a job.
So they all go to mushroom. I assume that. So, on the mushroom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Children's Islands. I saw farms on it, but it wasn't in an area where it's sold. It's just, you ride that regular,
A lot of it is rural. So, you know.
Right.
Let's see.
Establish it, you just keep cutting.
Yeah.
That's the key. We got very little bit of solid restriction problem. One part that I knew is probably the worst.
Yeah, no.
It's, there's 62 acres of tillable land, and probably 2 or 3 of it is law. But it's still, yeah, like my honeycomb, we till down the high tide. And then it falls off, it's not super flat now. There is some land, Preston Air Base, damn day rock. To like, anyway, she lost much of it. All of it, down there. You say you'll get yourself out of it.
Yeah, do you walk around?
I'm in the area, start to come up some, like, by the time you get to this.
I think it's out German.
Good. Okay, I mean, yeah, I had something like that, yeah. You know, here, there, yeah. Well, yeah, one of my, and so,
Well,
it doesn't really matter what you're selling, now, it's good enough for you to sell.
I think.
probably like you said, it's, but we don't.
Then the work they straight.
But it-
Why?
Oh, Bill, one day said I need 10 Danish. So our, she.
You can
go ahead.
email it when we first started.
You're taking all your Danish, you got tons of Danish. She's like a super.
It was really.
I'm being it for you.
Just bump water out of the process.
Huh. I got an engine thing outside your office. No big one. Yeah, we hang on. I got it over.
No. Yeah, lots of Yeah, I think it's might be warm and they pull those out of that cold.
Oh, no.
All right, see you guys.
You got one. Yep, we just need to go back and grab a couple litters. I just need to go back and grab a couple litters.
I think we're going to go back. I'm glad to see you. They came over here.
But it's, we're similar to work, I hope they have, they're afraid. But it was got to be copies. Sounded very nice.
I can read that out. Yeah.
Things were pretty good.
Good job.
But not finished.
It all starts at the top.
No, my problem.
These days, he's back and forth, he's like cooking on huge nights up here, the building products.
And Mr. Keller made it a point for me to be here.
Where did it?
I don't know, but he's out. Luckily, the commissions, they have a, you don't have a mindset. Okay. why. We don't want to know why. You know, and this is what, I mean, we got an answer.
Everybody in the door.
Well, I don't know. I think the districts actually think something, right? You know, so. See what you're thinking.